The average person works for over 40 years. 40 years of salaries, raises, bonuses, and overtime. 40 years of Monday mornings, performance reviews, and the slow grind upward toward a salary that finally feels like enough. And at the end of it, the majority retire with less than 3 years of living expenses saved. Not some people, most people, across every income level, every profession, every country with a functioning economy. For decades, money came in, salaries grew, standards of living improved, life, by most measures, got better. And yet somehow, at 65, the account balance tells a story that doesn't match 40 years of effort at all. Where it went isn't a mystery. Why nobody saw it leaving, that's the part worth understanding. Let's start with lifestyle inflation, which is a silent thief. Here's how it works. You earn more, so you upgrade. Not dramatically, reasonably. You move to a slightly nicer apartment because you can. You stop cooking on weeknights because honestly you've earned it. You fly direct instead of connecting because the difference is only a bit extra and your time is worth something now. You buy the better version of things. The nicer gym, the newer phone, the car that doesn't embarrass you in the car park. None of these feel like decisions. They feel like the natural consequence of doing well, and that's exactly the problem. Economists call this lifestyle inflation. As income rises, spending rises to match it, almost automatically, almost perfectly. The gap between what you earn and what you keep stays roughly the same, regardless of the number on your payslip. A person earning $40,000 a year and a person earning $140,000 a year can end up with identical amounts saved by the time they're 60. Not because the high earner was careless, because they upgraded every layer of their life in proportion to what they earned, and it felt completely justified the whole time. The trap is invisible because every single upgrade makes sense on its own. The apartment is nicer and you can afford it. The flights are better and the difference is small. The restaurant is a treat and you worked hard this week. None of these decisions feel like retirement theft. Together, they are exactly that. And the number that disappears into lifestyle inflation over a 40-year career isn't small. It is, for most people, the difference between financial independence and needing to work until their body stops cooperating. The salary was never the problem. What happened to it was. But here's the part that surprises people. Everyone points at the big purchases. The car, the holiday to Bali, the kitchen renovation. These feel like the culprits because they're visible. You can point at them, add them up, feel guilty about them. But the research tells a different story. In 2019, economists at the University of Chicago analyzed spending data across thousands of households and found that the majority of excess lifestyle spending wasn't concentrated in large purchases at all. It was distributed across dozens of small, recurring, completely invisible upgrades. The streaming services that multiplied quietly over the years, the grocery shop that drifted upmarket without a single conscious decision, the gym membership, the parking spot, the coffee that became a daily ritual so ordinary it stopped feeling like spending entirely. These aren't dramatic failures. They're the background hum of a life that expanded to fill the income available to it. And because each individual cost is so reasonable, nobody ever adds them up. The person spending $40 a week on coffee and snacks isn't thinking about the $2,000 a year disappearing into a takeaway cup. They're thinking about Tuesday morning and whether they want oat milk. This is what makes lifestyle inflation so brutally effective as a wealth destroyer. It doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like living. It feels like you've finally reached the point where you don't have to deprive yourself anymore. And that feeling is precisely what makes it so hard to see coming and almost impossible to reverse once it sets in. The big purchase you can see, the small ones you can't, and the small ones are what actually empty the account. Here's a number worth sitting with. If you take two people, same age, same starting salary, same industry, but one of them spends their career looking for the next opportunity, building skills, taking on extra work, asking for more, and the other clocks in, does the job, and clocks out, the income gap between them after 30 years isn't modest. It's enormous. Not because one is smarter, not because one got lucky, because compounding works on effort exactly the same way it works on money. Most people optimize their working life for comfort. They find a salary they can live on and quietly stop there. The job becomes a routine. The routine becomes a ceiling, and the ceiling feels fine because everyone around them has the same one. Everyone discusses savings rates and investment returns. Nobody discusses the income side of the equation, which is the part you actually control the most. You cannot save your way to financial independence on a salary that never grew. The math simply doesn't work. But a person who spent 30 years actively compounding their income through skills, through side work, through promotion, through negotiation, arrives at the savings savings conversation with a completely different set of numbers to work with. The uncomfortable truth is that most people treat their career the way they treat their health. They do the minimum required to keep the machine running, they show up, they complete the tasks, they avoid getting fired, and then they wonder, at the end, why the machine didn't produce more. A 2023 analysis by the Pew Research Center found that workers who changed jobs voluntarily earned on average significantly higher wage growth than those who stayed in the same role, in some years more than double. Not because job hoppers were more talented, because they kept putting their value to the test instead of accepting whatever the annual review offered. The people who stayed, who were loyal, who were comfortable, they paid for that comfort over decades in ways that never showed up on a single payslip but absolutely showed up at retirement. Comfort is expensive, it just sends the bill late. In the mid-2000s, a psychologist named Hal Hershfield at NYU ran a series of experiments that should have changed the way we think about saving forever. He showed participants digitally aged photographs of themselves, their own face, wrinkled and grey, and then measured how much they were willing to set aside for retirement. The result was striking. People who saw their future selves saved significantly more than those who didn't, not because they suddenly became more disciplined, because for the first time, the person they were saving for felt real. Because here's what Hirschfield's research revealed. When your brain thinks about your future self, the 65-year-old version of you sitting down to check that retirement account, it doesn't process that person as you. It processes them as a stranger, a vague, distant, unfamiliar figure with no immediate claim on your resources, and you do not naturally sacrifice for strangers. This is why spending today feels so consequence-free. Taking a holiday, upgrading the car, letting the savings sit untouched for another month, none of these feel like theft. They feel like living. The 65-year-old stranger can sort themselves out. Right now, today, there is a restaurant and a Friday and a life that needs living. This isn't weakness. It's just how the brain is built. We are wired for the immediate. The salary lands and the brain processes it as present money, not future security. The upgrade feels earned because it is earned. You worked for it. It's here. It's real. The retirement account is abstract. The new car is sitting in the driveway. And so the years pass. Not through recklessness, not through stupidity, through the completely ordinary act of living in the present, which is the only moment that ever feels real, until suddenly the future arrives and it turns out the stranger needed the money after all. The person who will retire broke isn't making bad decisions, they're making present ones, every single time. Now let's talk about the compounding people never saw coming. If you invest $500 a month starting at 25, by 65 you have roughly $1.7 million. If you wait until 35 to start, just 10 years later, 10 years of holidays and car upgrades and lifestyle, that number drops to around $600,000. Same monthly amount, same 40 years minus 10, but not half the result. A third, because the first 10 years weren't just 10 years of contributions. They were the years that everything else compounded on top of. That gap, over $1 million, came from a decade of ordinary spending, not extravagance, just life, just the restaurant habit and the nicer apartment and the salary that kept getting absorbed before it could be put to work. The human brain is genuinely terrible at understanding exponential growth. When researchers ask people to estimate how compounding works over time, almost everyone underestimates the back end. We think linearly. We assume that if we start later, we lose a proportional amount. We do not intuitively grasp that the last 10 years of compounding are worth more than the first 20 combined. Nobody told us. Nobody showed us the actual numbers, and so the decade slips by and it feels like a delay, not a devastation. This is the cruelest part of the whole story. The damage is invisible while it's happening. The years between 25 and 35 feel like the beginning. There is time. There is always more time. The urgency doesn't arrive until the maths does, and by then the most valuable decade is gone and cannot be bought back at any price. Lifestyle inflation took the income. The 9 to 5 ceiling kept the income small. The future self problem made it all feel fine, and compounding turned every one of those quiet, ordinary, completely reasonable years into a cost that never appeared on a single receipt. The bill doesn't arrive until the end, and it is always larger than anyone expected.